Karen Thompson had always been a dreamer, the kind of person who got lost in books about faraway places. As a librarian in a quiet little town, her days were filled with organizing shelves and helping kids find their next favorite story. But every night as she closed the library doors, she dreamed of adventure, of bustling streets, towering monuments, and cultures unlike anything she'd ever known. And among all the destinations that danced in her mind, one stood out. London. For years, Karen saved every penny she could spare. She skipped dinners out, canceled cable subscriptions, and even turned down invitations to family vacations, determined to make her dream come true. When she finally booked her ticket, it felt like stepping into one of her beloved novels. Her itinerary was packed with excitement, the Tower of London's haunting history, Big Ben's iconic chimes, and of course the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. It wasn't just a trip, it was her chance to live a story of her own. But as the departure date approached, Karen couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Sure, she loved reading about thrilling adventures, but actually living one? That was different. What if she got lost? What if people didn't understand her accent? Or worse, what if something bad happened? These thoughts kept her up at night, but she pushed them aside, reminding herself that life was meant to be lived, not just read about. When Karen landed in London, the city greeted her with its signature charm, double-decker buses weaving through narrow streets, street performers drawing crowds on cobblestone sidewalks, and the faint smell of tea wafting from cozy cafes. At first, everything seemed magical. She wandered wide-eyed through museums, snapped endless photos of landmarks, and marveled at how alive the city felt. But beneath her excitement lingered a quiet anxiety. The crowds were bigger than she'd imagined, the subway system more confusing, and the pace faster than anything she was used to. By the end of each day, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. On her third morning, Karen decided to visit Buckingham Palace, the crown jewel of her trip. She dressed carefully, wanting to look presentable for such an iconic destination. As she walked toward the palace gates, anticipation bubbled inside her. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. But when she arrived, the scene wasn't quite what she expected. Hundreds of tourists swarmed the area, jostling for space to take pictures. Children cried, cameras flashed, and voices overlapped in a cacophony of languages. Karen clutched her bag tightly, feeling small amidst the chaos. What struck her most, though, were the royal guards. Standing tall and immovable, they seemed almost otherworldly in their bright red uniforms and bearskin hats. Their stoic expressions made them appear untouchable, like statues carved from stone. Karen watched them closely, fascinated yet unsettled. Something about their stillness unnerved her. It was as if they weren't human at all. As the minutes ticked by and the crowd pressed closer, Karen's nerves began to fray. She told herself to relax, to enjoy the moment. But deep down, a voice whispered that things weren't as safe as they seemed. Little did she know, that voice would soon lead her to make a decision she'd regret forever. The changing of the guard ceremony was in full swing when Karen finally managed to squeeze her way closer to the palace gates. The rhythmic marching of soldiers, the blare of trumpets, and the synchronized movements of the guards captivated the crowd. Everyone around her seemed awestruck, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the spectacle. But while others were entranced, Karen couldn't shake the unease that had been building inside her since she arrived. Her eyes darted nervously from one guard to another, trying to make sense of their eerie stillness. They stood like statues, not flinching even as tourists snapped photos inches from their faces or children tugged playfully at their uniforms. It was impressive, yes, but also unsettling. To Karen, their lack of reaction felt unnatural, almost robotic. She wondered how they could remain so calm in such a chaotic environment. Wasn't anyone else bothered by it? As the ceremony continued, Karen found herself standing near one particular guard who seemed especially imposing. His posture was perfect, his gaze fixed straight ahead, and his expression unreadable. Every now and then, his head would turn slightly, scanning the crowd with deliberate precision. When his eyes briefly landed on Karen, her heart skipped a beat. For a split second, she thought he was staring directly at her, judging her, sizing her up. Her breath quickened, and her palms grew clammy. He moved. She muttered under her breath, clutching her bag tightly. Why did he look at me? Karen's mind raced with irrational thoughts. What if he wasn't just watching the crowd? What if he saw her as a threat? After all, hadn't she read somewhere that these guards were trained to protect the royal family at any cost? Maybe his glance wasn't casual. It was calculated. Maybe he was planning to step forward, to confront her for some unknown reason. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that something bad was about to happen. The noise around her faded into the background as panic took hold. Her vision tunneled, focusing solely on the guard in front of her. She barely noticed the child laughing nearby or the couple holding hands behind her. All she could see was him, and all she could feel was fear. Without realizing it, her hand slipped into her bag, searching for something familiar, something safe. Her fingers closed around the small canister of pepper spray she always carried, a gift from her niece who joked that you never know when you'll need it. At the time, Karen had laughed it off, thinking she'd never actually use it. Now, though, it felt like her only lifeline. As the guard shifted his weight ever so slightly, Karen's imagination spiraled out of control. In her mind, he was no longer a ceremonial figure but a potential danger. She didn't stop to question whether her fears were reasonable. There was no room for logic in her panicked state. Instead, she tightened her grip on the pepper spray, her knuckles turning white. The rational part of her brain, the part that might have reminded her that these guards were professionals trained to ignore distractions, was drowned out by adrenaline and terror. Seconds ticked by like hours as Karen wrestled with herself. Should she act? Could she really be overreacting? But before she could think clearly, the guard turned his head again, this time just enough to meet her gaze once more. That was all it took. Convinced she was in immediate danger, Karen made a decision she would later regret. A decision born not of reason, but of raw, unfiltered panic. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the small canister of pepper spray tightly. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, drowning out any shred of rational thought. In that moment, all she could focus on was survival. The guard's towering figure loomed large in her vision, his red uniform stark against the backdrop of Buckingham Palace. To Karen, he wasn't just a ceremonial figure anymore. He was a looming threat, an immovable force that seemed to be closing in on her with every passing second. Before she could second-guess herself, Karen acted. With trembling hands, she raised the pepper spray and pressed down on the nozzle. A fine mist shot through the air, catching the guard squarely in the face. For a split second, everything froze. The music from the ceremony stopped abruptly, replaced by gasps and screams from the crowd. People nearby recoiled in shock, some covering their mouths while others scrambled to get out of the way. Karen stood frozen too, staring wide-eyed at what she had done. The guard's reaction came quickly, but not violently. He stumbled back, coughing and blinking furiously as the stinging spray took effect. His previously stoic expression dissolved into one of pain and disorientation. One hand instinctively went to his eyes while the other fumbled for support. Around him, chaos erupted. Tourists shouted and pointed, phones were whipped out to record the scene, and security personnel rushed forward, their voices sharp and urgent. For Karen, time seemed to slow down. The reality of her actions began to sink, in crashing over her like a tidal wave. What had she done? She hadn't meant to hurt anyone. She'd only wanted to protect herself. But now, looking at the guard struggling to recover, she realized how wildly disproportionate her response had been. This wasn't a villain from a movie or a character in one of her adventure novels. This was a real person, doing his job in front of hundreds of witnesses. Her initial panic gave way to horror as two officers approached her, their expressions grim. They spoke firmly, demanding that she drop the pepper spray and step aside. Karen complied without hesitation, her legs feeling like jelly beneath her. As they led her away from the scene, she caught glimpses of the crowd's reactions, some people glaring at her with anger, others whispering among themselves, and a few filming the entire ordeal on their phones. It felt surreal, as though she were watching someone else's life unfold instead of living it herself. As Karen was escorted toward a waiting vehicle, her mind raced with questions. Would she be arrested? Was this assault? How could she possibly explain herself to authorities? Who didn't know her? Who couldn't understand the terror that had driven her to act so recklessly? Each thought weighed heavier than the last, pressing down on her until she felt like she couldn't breathe. But amidst the guilt and fear, another emotion began to creep in. Regret. Deep, crushing regret. Karen replayed the moment in her head, over and over again. The guard's slight turn of the head, her panicked decision, the instant the spray hit its mark. If only she had taken a deep breath. If only she had reminded herself that these guards were trained professionals, not threats. If only she had trusted her instincts to walk away instead of lashing out. By the time she was seated in the back of a police car, tears streaming down her face, Karen knew there was no undoing what had happened. All she could do now was face the consequences and hope that somehow, someway, she might find a way to make things right. The ride to the police station was a blur for Karen. She sat hunched in the back seat of the patrol car, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring blankly at the floor. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. Outside, the streets of London passed by in a haze, familiar sights that now felt foreign and unwelcoming. Every bump in the road, every siren wail from passing vehicles seemed louder than usual, echoing the storm brewing inside her mind. When they arrived at Scotland Yard, Karen was led into a small, sterile room with pale walls and fluorescent lighting. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights. An officer instructed her to sit at a plain metal table while they processed her information. Her heart sank as she watched them jot down notes about the incident. Pepper spray, Royal Guard, public disturbance. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of her reputation. For hours, Karen waited, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. She replayed the scene at Buckingham Palace over and over again in her head. The guard's startled expression, the chaos in the crowd, the horrified looks on people's faces. What would happen next? Would she be charged with assault? Could she face jail time? And how would this affect her life back home? The questions swirled endlessly, leaving her dizzy with dread. Just when Karen thought she couldn't take any more silence, the door opened, and a man in a neatly pressed suit entered the room. He introduced himself as an official liaison from Buckingham Palace. At first, Karen braced herself for the worst, a formal reprimand, perhaps even legal action against her. But instead, the man's demeanor was calm and measured, almost kind. He explained that the guard she had sprayed was receiving medical attention and, thankfully, was expected to recover fully. Then came the unexpected twist. The guard didn't want to press charges. Karen blinked in disbelief. He doesn't? She stammered, her voice trembling. The official nodded. No, he does not. However, he added firmly, this is a serious matter. You acted impulsively, and your actions caused unnecessary harm. If you are willing to issue a sincere public apology, we may be able to resolve this without further escalation. Relief washed over Karen, but it was mixed with shame. On one hand, she was grateful for the opportunity to make amends. On the other, she knew that apologizing publicly would mean facing the world's judgment. Still, she didn't hesitate. Nodding vigorously, she agreed to do whatever was necessary to right her wrong. As the official outlined the steps ahead, a formal statement, a meeting with the guard, and possibly a press release, Karen listened intently, clinging to his words like a lifeline. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could salvage something from this mess. But even as she nodded and promised to cooperate, Karen couldn't shake the image of the guard's pained expression from her mind. No matter what happened next, She knew she'd carry the memory of that moment forever. It wasn't just guilt, it was a lesson etched into her soul, one she vowed never to forget. The day of the apology arrived, and Karen felt like she was walking to her own trial. Her stomach churned as she stood outside Buckingham Palace once again, this time under very different circumstances. Gone were the bustling crowds of tourists and the cheerful music of the changing of the guard ceremony. Instead, a small group of palace officials, reporters, and security personnel gathered in a quiet courtyard. Cameras clicked softly in the background, capturing every detail of the surreal scene. Karen had spent the night before rehearsing what she would say, but no amount of preparation could calm her nerves. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her hands, the outline of her apology, but doubted she'd even be able to read it without her voice cracking. As she approached the guard she had sprayed just days earlier, her legs felt like they might buckle beneath her. He stood tall and composed, his uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Karen wondered if he was angry or simply putting on a brave face for the cameras. When it was time to speak, Karen took a deep breath and stepped forward. The world seemed to shrink around her, leaving only her, the guard, and the weight of her mistake. Her voice trembled as she began, each word feeling heavier than the last. I want to apologize, she started, pausing to steady herself. What I did was wrong, so incredibly wrong, and I can't begin to express how sorry I am. She went on to explain her actions, or rather, her overreaction. She admitted that her fear had clouded her judgment, causing her to misinterpret the guard's movements as a threat. You were just doing your job, she said, her voice breaking. And I treated you like something you're not. I'm so ashamed of myself. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, her vulnerability plain for everyone to see. The guard listened silently, his posture unwavering. When Karen finished, there was a long pause, a tense silence that made her heart race. Then slowly he nodded. His response was brief but powerful. Thank you for apologizing. I accept it. Those simple words carried more weight than Karen could have imagined. Hearing them, she felt a wave of relief wash over her, though it was tinged with lingering guilt. Afterward, palace officials guided Karen through a short press conference, where journalists peppered her with questions about the incident. Some were kind, asking how she planned to move forward from the experience. Others were less forgiving, probing into whether she thought her actions reflected poorly on tourists or Americans in general. Karen answered as honestly as she could, owning up to her mistake while emphasizing that she hoped others could learn from her poor decision. As the event drew to a close, Karen noticed something unexpected. Not all eyes were filled with judgment. A few people in the crowd gave her sympathetic smiles, nodding slightly as if to acknowledge her courage in facing the situation head-on. One woman even mouthed the words "thank you" as Karen walked past. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. By the time Karen left the palace grounds, exhaustion had set in, both physically and emotionally. Yet, despite everything, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The apology hadn't erased her shame, nor had it undone the damage she had caused, but it had given her something equally important, a chance to start healing. For the first time since the incident, Karen allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could turn this painful chapter into something meaningful. Back home, Karen's life became a strange mix of normalcy and chaos. The incident at Buckingham Palace had made headlines around the world, and while the story eventually faded from global news cycles, it lingered in her small town like an unshakable shadow. Friends and neighbors greeted her with knowing smiles, some teasing her good-naturedly about her royal encounter, while others avoided eye contact altogether, unsure how to broach the topic. At work, things were even more awkward. The library, staff tried their best to act as if nothing had happened, but whispers inevitably found their way through the stacks. One day, a local newspaper ran a light-hearted piece titled "Pepper Spray Karen, a Cautionary Tale," complete with a photo of Karen standing near the guard during the apology. It wasn't meant to be cruel, more humorous than anything, but the nickname stuck. For weeks afterward, kids coming into the library would ask, "Are you that Karen?" Their curiosity was innocent enough, but each question stung just a little. Despite the embarrassment, Karen refused to let the incident define her. She began sharing her story openly, not because she wanted attention, but because she hoped it might help others avoid making similar mistakes. During library events, she'd weave her experience into discussions about travel safety or cultural awareness, using humor and humility to connect with her audience. "I thought I was protecting myself," she'd say with a rueful smile. "But all I did was prove that overreacting can land you in serious trouble." Her talks resonated with people far beyond what she expected. Parents praised her honesty, saying her story taught their children valuable lessons about impulse control and respecting cultural differences. Fellow travelers reached out online, sharing their own tales of missteps abroad and thanking Karen for reminding them that everyone makes mistakes and that owning up to them is what truly matters. Slowly but surely, Karen started to see her blunder not as a source of shame but as a catalyst for growth. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. Late at night, lying awake in bed, Karen would replay the incident in her mind, wondering if she could have handled things differently. What if she had walked away? What if she had asked someone nearby for help instead of relying on her instincts alone? These questions haunted her, but they also pushed her to reflect deeply on her actions and motivations. To cope, Karen threw herself into learning more about cultures and customs around the world. She enrolled in an online course about international etiquette, studied travel guides, and even joined a local cultural exchange group where she met people from all walks of life. Each new interaction reminded her how much she still had to learn, and how important it was to approach unfamiliar situations with patience and understanding. Over time, Karen noticed subtle changes within herself. She became calmer, less reactive, and more willing to pause before acting. When faced with stressful situations, she practiced taking deep breaths and asking herself, "Is this really worth it?" The answer was almost always no. This newfound mindfulness didn't erase her past mistake, but it gave her tools to navigate future challenges with grace rather than panic. Though she knew she'd never forget the day she pepper-sprayed a royal guard, Karen came to see it as a turning point, a moment that forced her to confront her fears, flaws, and assumptions. And while she never planned to return to London anytime soon, she held on to the hope that someday she might visit again, not as the woman who caused a scene, but as someone wiser, kinder, and ready to embrace the beauty of the world without letting fear get in the way. Months passed and Karen's life began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of her infamous moment at Buckingham Palace had faded, but its impact lingered in ways both big and small. What surprised her most was how the experience continued to shape her, not just as a traveler or a librarian, but as a person. She found herself seeing the world through a different lens, one that focused less on fear and more on understanding. One crisp autumn morning, Karen received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope bore the royal crest of Buckingham Palace, and her hands trembled as she carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, signed by none other than the guard she had sprayed. His words were simple yet profound. "Dear Ms. Thompson, I want to thank you for your apology. It takes courage to admit when we are wrong, and I admire your willingness to learn from this experience. I wish you all the best, moving forward." Enclosed with the note was a small token, a miniature figurine of a royal guard, standing tall and proud in his iconic red uniform and bearskin hat. Karen stared at the items for a long time, tears welling up in her eyes. This gesture wasn't just kind, it was transformative. Here was a man who could have easily held a grudge, who might have dismissed her apology as insincere, yet he chose compassion instead. That single act of grace reminded Karen of something she'd almost forgotten: humanity's capacity for forgiveness. Inspired by the guard's kindness, Karen decided to pay it forward. She started volunteering at community workshops aimed at helping people overcome anxiety and impulsivity. Drawing from her own experiences, she shared practical tips on staying calm under pressure and encouraged participants to think critically before reacting. Her talks became so popular that local schools invited her to speak with students about responsible decision-making. Teachers praised her ability to connect with young people, saying her story resonated deeply with teens navigating their own struggles with self-control. At the library, Karen launched a new program called Global Connections, where patrons could borrow travel guides, attend cultural presentations, and even participate in virtual exchanges with libraries abroad. The initiative quickly gained traction, bringing together curious minds eager to explore the world without leaving their hometown. For Karen, it was a way to channel her passion for travel into something meaningful, something that celebrated diversity rather than feared it. Despite these accomplishments, Karen still faced moments of doubt. Some days, scrolling through social media, she'd come across memes or jokes referencing her infamous pepper spray incident. At first they stung, but over time, she learned to laugh along with them. After all, if she couldn't find humor in her own misstep, how could she expect others to take her seriously when she spoke about learning from mistakes? Her journey also taught her to embrace vulnerability. Whether speaking to a room full of strangers or chatting with friends over coffee, Karen made a conscious effort to be open about her flaws and fears. She realized that pretending to have everything figured out only created distance between her and those around her. By admitting her imperfections, she found deeper connections and inspired others to do the same. As winter approached, Karen placed the Royal Guard figurine on her desk at the library, where it caught the light streaming through the windows each morning. To her, it symbolized not just forgiveness but growth. The idea that even our biggest blunders can lead to brighter paths if we're willing to learn from them. Though the road ahead wasn't always easy, Karen felt ready to face it with humility, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. Years later, Karen often found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that fateful day in London. What had started as a dream vacation turned into an unforgettable lesson, one that shaped not only her perspective, but also the way she interacted with the world. The miniature figurine of the Royal Guard still sat proudly on her desk, serving as a constant reminder of both her mistake and the grace extended to her by someone who could have chosen anger instead. Though she never returned to Buckingham Palace, Karen kept tabs on its traditions from afar. She subscribed to newsletters about British culture, watched documentaries about the royal family, and even joined an online forum for history enthusiasts. It was her way of staying connected to the place that had once been the backdrop of her greatest embarrassment and ultimate redemption. Occasionally, she'd joke with friends that maybe one day she'd go back, not as pepper spray Karen, but as someone who truly appreciated the beauty and history of the palace grounds. Her transformation wasn't just personal, it rippled outward, touching the lives of those around her. The Global Connections program at the library flourished, drawing visitors from all over the county. Families brought their children to learn about faraway lands. Retirees shared stories of their own travels, and young adults used the resources to plan adventures of their own. Karen loved watching people discover new cultures, knowing firsthand how transformative such experiences could be, if approached with respect and curiosity. One spring afternoon, Karen received another unexpected letter. This time it came from a teenager named Emily, who had attended one of her workshops. In neat handwriting, Emily thanked Karen for sharing her story, saying it had inspired her to take responsibility after losing her temper during a school project. "I used to think mistakes defined me," Emily wrote, "but hearing you talk made me realize they can actually teach us something if we let them." Reading those words filled Karen with pride, not because she sought recognition, but because she knew her experience had helped someone else grow. That's when it hit her. The real legacy of her London incident wasn't the viral headlines or awkward nicknames. It was the opportunity it gave her to inspire change, however small, in others' lives. As the years went by, Karen became known less for her infamous blunder and more for her resilience and kindness. Friends teased her about writing a memoir titled, "From Panic to Peace: How I Pepper Sprayed My Way to Wisdom." While she laughed along with them, Part of her wondered if there might be truth in the joke. After all, her journey had been anything but ordinary. On quiet evenings, Karen would sit by her window, sipping tea and flipping through old photographs from her trip. There were pictures of Big Ben glowing under streetlights, the Tower of London shrouded in mist, and crowds gathered around Buckingham Palace. Each image carried memories, some painful, some joyful, but none of them regrettable. They reminded her that every moment, no matter how imperfect, added depth and meaning to her story. In the end, Karen didn't see herself as a cautionary tale or a punchline. Instead, she viewed her life as proof that growth often comes from discomfort, that forgiveness is a gift worth treasuring, and that even our biggest mistakes can lead to beautiful beginnings. As she closed her photo album and gazed out at the stars, she smiled softly, grateful for the winding path that had brought her here, and excited for whatever lay ahead.